night's going to be Melchizedek. But today we're going to what you might want to call part 2 of the early Abraham stuff, which is also pretty cool. Just to summarize, of course, God sovereignly chooses Abram, to be the father of the people. So we know he's the father of all the Jews. He's also the father of the Arabs. And so the first promise to Abram, if I use Abram and Abraham interchangeably, I think you all know what I mean, right? He wasn't actually Abraham until a little bit later. But one of the promises was descendants. You know, he was going to have if you could count the stars, if you could count the grains of sand, that's going to be your descendants. And, you know, later he's going to say, even from Ishmael, he's going to, which we're going to talk about today, you know, kings are going to come from you. And so when you look at the scope of what's happened since the early days of Abraham and Ishmael and Isaac, there's lots of descendants. All the Arabs, all the Jews. Now, Jews are not a whole lot. There's only 2 out of every 1,000 people in the world are Jews. But 60% of Nobel Prize winners have been Jews. And I forgot what percentage if you go to any profession, whether it's medicine, law, finances, there's an unusually high percentage of Jews for a group of people that's 2 out of 1,000 people in the world. So I'm not sure if that means a lot, but it's kind of interesting. And so Abraham had a lot of descendants, and of course he was promised land. So he had land. They lost the land. They got the land back. They lost the land. In 1948, they got the land back. 1967, the land was expanded. And now there's about 8 million people who live there, which is not even half the Jews of the world. You know, if you move to Israel, that's called making Aliyah, which means going up, because you always go up to Jerusalem, because Jerusalem's the highest point. So, and we know that the establishment of Israel, we're not going to get into Bible prophecy, but that's an important piece of Bible prophecy. Because when people 200 years ago would talk about, well, when's Jesus going to come back? Well, I don't know. But there was no Israel. So, you know, if you read through the Old Testament and New Testament prophecies, Jesus can't come back until there's an Israel. So now there's an Israel. You know, more and more Jews are coming to faith in Messiah since COVID started than in the last 50 years before. Now there's a Christian television station there's 2 on the 2 Israeli cable networks. So there's 2 Christian channels. There's Christian radio, and up until 5-7 years ago, it was illegal. You couldn't have it. And so another prophetic sign is more and more Jews are becoming believers. And so we know what Paul says, you know, at the end, all Israel will be saved. There'll be something's going to happen that's kind of a sudden, you know, Zechariah talks about it a lot, you know, and they're going to look at him whom they've pierced. They're going to mourn like you mourn for an only son. And we see more and more, like 30 years ago, there were 3 Messianic congregations in Israel. Now there's 229. Now, granted, a lot of them are small. You know, you have congregations that have, you know, 7 or 10 people, but there's 229 now. You also have, well, some congregations that we've worked with there's a couple hundred people that belong. And so you're starting to see the promise of the nations of the earth will be blessed through you. You know, you're going to have these descendants. The families are going to be blessed through you. Even the goyim, us, are going to be blessed by you, through you. So we see that Messiah's kingdom is going to come from Abraham. The physical part of it, because Yeshua, Jesus, has to have physical heredity. And so one of the reasons the chosen people were, quote, formed, or whatever you want to call it, is that Jesus needed physical heredity. He is, in fact, descended from Abraham and from Isaac and from Jacob and from Judah and all the way down the line to David and so forth. So we all know that. But, you know, a lot of people, because it's hard to comprehend the fact that Messiah is 100% God and 100% man. That's a tough concept to understand, of course. And he's not 50-50 or 80-20 or 60-40. He's 100% of both natures. So, you know, when he was a little kid and he fell down and skinned his knee, it hurt. When they pounded nails into him and whipped him, it hurt because it was a real body. He got tired. He had to eat. He had to sit there and listen to those guys and say, I had enough of you guys for today. I gotta go off by myself for a while. You guys were making me crazy. No, he probably never said that, but you know what I mean. He had all our human experiences, but yet he's also 100% God. So the humanity has to come from somewhere, and it starts with Abraham, because now the plan of salvation starts in flesh, which is really important. Because if Messiah doesn't have both natures, can't save us. Because God can't die. God can't bleed and die. But an ordinary man can't save us. You know, I can't go to God and say, you know, I want to die for Tony's sins. So why don't you just kill me and then he can be saved? Well, they can kill me, but he'll still have his sins. Because I'm an ordinary man and I'm a sinner. So you need a perfect man, which, you know, Paul tells us in Romans, he had the appearance of sinful flesh. He looked like everybody else, but didn't have sin. When we get to the bronze serpent, we'll see the bronze serpent looked like the thing that was killing people, but it didn't have poison in it. You know, he looked like an ordinary man. So, you know, when you ran into him at Outback Steakhouse or somewhere, he wasn't sitting there glowing, or you wouldn't walk by and go, oh, look at him. He looked like everybody else did. In fact, Isaiah 53 tells us there was nothing that would make you look at him. Very ordinary. Nobody stepped back and said, wow. Well, Transfiguration was a little different, but so the humanity, the plan of salvation in the flesh starts with Abram. Then he becomes Abraham, which is father of nations. And he is, in fact, the father of nations. So since we're going to go to Genesis 16 and give you a second to flip to it. But since he's promised all these descendants, he's a 75-year-old guy, then he's an 80-year-old guy, and he doesn't have any descendants. And Sarai, his wife, isn't getting any younger. So I don't know if he ever said to God, you know, I don't know what you guys do in heaven, but down here, when you're, 80 years old, 85 years old, you don't generally start having children. Where's Jordan? This is a tough crowd. Oh, man. Linda's going to have to laugh at my jokes or else I start to get discouraged. But anyway, so he doesn't have any descendants yet. Sarah, let's just call her Sarah, make it easy. Sarah has no children. In the old days, in the ancient times, a woman who didn't have children was called barren. And most of the time that was felt to be a curse. You're barren. How many times the Bible talks about women being barren? But Sarah's barren for a reason, because God's glory is going to be manifested because of this, as we're going to see. So, in 16, we see another great example of, we talked about one example when Adam and Eve fell. Their plan, make fig leaves and we'll cover ourselves. Now, after some time's gone by, there's no children. Sarah says, maybe we need to make a different plan. We want to, get into God's plan, but maybe he didn't plan it quite right. Maybe if we do something about it, we'll kind of get in the groove with this plan. It's what churches do all the time. Let's have a committee to do this. Well, how about we ask the Holy Spirit what we should do? Well, how about we, these guys go over there and these guys go over there. Maybe that'll work. Well, maybe we should pray about what we should do. Maybe we should ask the Holy Spirit what we should do. Because after all, there's already a plan. So here, we're going to see Sarah makes kind of a crazy plan. If somebody wants to start reading at the beginning of 16. Okay, let's pause there. So Sarah's plan is, hey, Abraham, why don't you sleep with my servant, Hagar, and maybe she can have a child. And that'll start off the descendant thing. Now remember, he had told Abraham that the descendants were going to come from him, from his loins, so to speak. He was going to be the father. In a little while, they're going to say, we're going to get to an amazing thing about God expressing himself as Trinity at the end of this lesson. But, God says, no, the descendant, the children of promise are going to come from you and Sarah. They're not going to come from other women. They're not going to come. So here's this old Abraham and this young woman, and his wife says, go sleep with her. Maybe she'll get pregnant. And she does. And then when Sarah finds out that she's pregnant, she gets mad. Which, it's not unusual, but it's kind of a weird situation. But it's a great example of trying to make a human plan instead of following what the plan was going to be. So using Hagar, the slave woman, who was an Egyptian, violates the plan. But Sarah suggests it. Abraham goes along with it. Maybe not just for the physical reason of doing it, but thinking, well, yeah, as long as I have descendants, what does it matter what woman they come from? So he should have known better because he was talking to God through this whole thing, but now he has no faith, and he has no faith in the timing. Okay, go on from there. Start at Okay, let's pause there. Sarah runs away. Now here we have to talk about this concept of angel of the Lord. Hebrew, it's the Malach Adonai. Malach is a messenger. What we call an angel is malach. We use the Greek word angelos, which is a messenger. Apostle comes from apostolos, which means the sent one, but the messenger is angelos, and that's where we get the word angel in the Greek form, but in Hebrew it's malach. Now you notice here, angel is capitalized, and Lord is all capitalized. So remember, when Lord is all capitalized in the English translation, that's Yahweh, that's God's name. So the angel of the Lord, Malach Adonai, sometimes means an angel like Gabriel or Michael, or, we only know the names of a couple of angels. There's myriads and myriads of angels. We don't know all their names. And when I'm in heaven, I don't really want to learn all their names. But, and I hope they have name tags. But, good, Linda's laughing. This is good. But, Paul says, we're going to be judging angels. We're going to be ruling over angels. So you guys know what I want. I want some big angel to be in front of me, and I say, you, go get me a large coffee, just a little bit of cream, and a chocolate cream donut. And he'll go and do it. Or maybe he'll strike me dumb or something. I don't know. But one thing Zechariah, John the Baptist's father, learned was you don't mouth off to Gabriel. So we don't know if this is an angel or this is some manifestation of God. But this comes up a lot of times in the Old Testament. So Hagar is pregnant, and the Malach Adonai, the angel of the Lord, maybe it's the Lord, maybe it's an angel, tells her, your descendants are going to be numerous. Because he's going to be the father of the Arabs, Ishmael. And he's named Ishmael, it tells you there, because it means the Lord has heard your affliction. Now, we have to say something about Hebrew names, right? You probably all know this. It's the EL at the end that's important. So when you say Israel, you're actually offending God, because the EL is the important part of it. That's God. That's the word for God in ancient Hebrew. So, we know the words Michael means who is like the Lord. It comes from a Hebrew prayer called Michamocha, who is like you. And, Samuel and Gabriel and, there's a lot of words that end in EL. That's why I always chuckle when somebody says, oh, we gave the baby a nice Christian name. His name is Michael. And I always laugh. I say, well, actually, that's a Hebrew name. But, yes, it's a Christian name, too, but it's a name that honors God because God's name is in it. So Jacob, as you know, is going to be renamed Israel because he wrestled with God. We're going to get to that in a couple of lessons. But so here, Ishmael is going to be the father of people. And look what it says. This cracks me up. My translation says he's going to be a wild man. And he's going to be, every man's hand is going to be against him. So he's going to be the father of the Arabs. He's going to be a wild man. And everybody's going to be against him. Well, is that interesting? So he gives rise to Arabs. The older translations say he's like a wild ass. And so will his descendants be. So Hagar gets encouraged by this angel. So she says, you are the God who sees. Have I also been him who sees? Have I also here seen him who cares for me? So she's saying, is this angel, have I seen God when I saw this angel? Have I seen him, capital H? So this might be a manifestation of God. Well, I don't know. With the Malach Adonai term, you don't always know. Like the angel of death at Passover is the Malach Adonai. But God says, I will go through the land and strike the firstborn. So it says an angel does it, but he says, I do it. So anyway, we don't want to belabor that too much. So you see in verse 15, so Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram named his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael. So now 16 years has already gone by. I'm sorry. 11 years has already gone by. A promise of you're going to have descendants. This descendant counts as a descendant, but is not the child of promise. 11 years has already gone by. And no children have come from he and Sarah. Now, it's important to note here, because we're going to see Sarah's going to get mad and she's going to make Hagar and Ishmael leave. But in those days, most men either had more than one wife or they had mistresses, which were called concubines. The concubines had no legal rights to anything that the man had. And you have to understand, this is a total male society. Women couldn't own property. They couldn't work. They weren't even counted when people were counted. Women were not allowed to testify in court. They were basically the husband's property. So when a man had a mistress, that woman the wife had no rights. The mistress had even less than no rights. But the children the sons born from a mistress could claim some legal right. I don't know all the details of that, and it's not really important. But the children had some rights, but the concubines, the mistresses, were basically slaves. So Ishmael doesn't really have, he's going to disappear, and then he's going to show up periodically in the future. And Hagar is going to disappear. We don't know what happens to her. But we're going to go now to 17. So somebody start reading the beginning of 17. Anybody? Okay, pause there. So now God appears, here it says, the Lord God appears to him. So he sees something. He doesn't just hear it. And God changes his name from Avram to Avraham, father of nations. Now he's Abraham, father of nations. And he says, kings are going to come from you. Well, if you read the books of Kings and Chronicles, you have a whole list of all the kings that came from Abraham. The ultimate eternal king, Jesus, also, of course, comes from Abraham. But he says, from you are going to come kings. And if you follow me, I'm going to be your God, and this land is going to be your everlasting possession. Now, when, I can't remember how many years ago it was, the man who was the Israeli ambassador to the UN used this verse about Canaan when people were accusing him of saying, well, you know, the Ottomans had the land, and then the English had the land, and then you guys came, you have no right to the land, you have no, you know, they were going on and on about how they had no rights to the land. And this guy held up his Bible, and he said, our deed to the land is in here. And he quoted that verse, which, you know, is nice from a spiritual viewpoint, but probably wouldn't stand up in court. But, yeah. Like if I came here and said, well, my Bible says that I actually own this land, somebody might say, whatever, just get back in your car and get out of here. But it was kind of, you know, it was kind of nice that he did it. So if you follow me, now, you know, the other interesting thing, there's no law yet. There's not a single law. The law's not going to come for 400 and some more years. Then when the law comes, the deal's going to be, here's 613 laws. If you follow them all, you'll be righteous. You'll be my people. I'll be your God. Here's the 613 laws. Good luck with that. Then after about the first 12 minutes, you'd say, oh, man, I already blew one of them. Then after about 2.5 hours, you'd say, man, I already blew 20 of them. That's a joke. Come on. But anyway, so there's no law yet. But now we're about to get a law. There's not even a talk about the Sabbath yet. You know, the Sabbath is the ultimate law, as we're going to see. When we get to Exodus, the Sabbath becomes so important that on every page, keep the Sabbath, keep the Sabbath, keep the Sabbath. Anytime it mentions the feasts of Israel, the feasts of the Lord that we celebrate on Friday nights, you know, the first one that's always mentioned is Shabbat, is the Sabbath, because it is a feast that occurs every week. It's a memorial of creation. And so there wasn't even a Sabbath law yet, but look what's going to happen here. Start reading at verse 9.
God said to Abraham, for your part, you and your descendants after you must keep my covenant throughout the ages. This is the covenant between me and you and your descendants after you that you must keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised. Circumcise the flesh of your foreskin. That will be the sign of the covenant between me and you. Throughout the ages, every male among you, when he is 8 days old, shall be circumcised, including houseborn slaves and those acquired with money from any foreigner who is not of your descendants. Yes, both the houseborn slaves and those acquired with money must be circumcised. Thus my covenant will be in your flesh as an everlasting covenant. If a male is uncircumcised, that is, if the flesh of his foreskin has not been cut away, such a one will be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant.
Okay, pause. So, this is kind of the first law that comes, is circumcision. And it's a sign, it's a physical sign of the covenant. It's a sign in flesh that you belong to the covenant. Now here again, women, you know, how do you know when a woman belongs to the covenant? You know, that's not even mentioned. It's not even a consideration. I mean, obviously, God does that. But the sign of circumcision is every male child at the 8th day has to be circumcised. Now, think about Jesus. He's involved in this twice. He's giving this law to Abraham because he's God. He's in the Godhead. God is giving this law to Abraham. Now he's officially Abraham, so I don't have to sweat it anymore. So nobody's laughing. But anyway, so Jesus, as the Godhead, gives this law to Abraham. When Jesus of Nazareth is born, And whether he's born December 25th, which is pretty unlikely, or whether he's born October 12th, or whether he's born April 8th, or whether he's born July 12th, or whatever day he's born, and it doesn't really matter when he's born, at day 8, somebody comes and circumcises him. And he's given his name. And it says they named him Yeshua, which was the name the angel gave him. Now, the angel didn't say, you're going to have this boy and you're going to name him Yeshua because I know you guys really like that name. Or, I know, Mary, you had an uncle Yeshua who you really liked. Or, he's named Yeshua because that means salvation. It says he's going to sit on the throne of his father David. So he's going to be king, and he's going to bring salvation. So his name is also his job description, so to speak. His name means salvation. It's not just a random name. Now, he wasn't the only man named Yeshua. It's actually a derivative of Joshua, which is Yahshua, which also means salvation comes from God. And there were many other men named Yeshua. In fact, there were some false messiahs named Yeshua. But his name means salvation. So Jesus himself gives the law and subjects himself to the law. And like you guys always hear me say, 8-day-old Jesus in his divinity. Now, what does an 8-day-old boy do? Cries, eats, messes his diaper, goes to sleep, wakes up, wants to eat again, cries, messes his diaper, cries some more, wants to eat again. That's pretty much what an 8-day-old baby does. But 8-day-old Jesus in his divinity could have sat up in the crib and said to Mary and Joseph, I know that according to the covenant, today is supposed to be my circumcision and you give me my name, but I'm the one who gave the covenant to Abraham. I'm the one who gave the law to Moses, and I'm the Messiah. I'm the God-man. So obviously that doesn't apply to me. No, he subjects himself to that covenant. Pretty remarkable. At day 40, when you have to take the boy to the temple and present him, it happens. Mary goes through a mikvah bath, takes the baby in. Now, we don't know who did the circumcision. You don't have to be a religious leader or a rabbi or anything to do a circumcision. You just have to know how to do it. Now, the presentation, a priest, a Levitical priest, presents the baby boy who goes at day 40. A girl goes at day 66. I don't know why. That's another thing we can ask. But when Jesus went for the presentation at the temple, a Levitical priest, we don't know who he was, but he found out later, probably was blown away when he realized what he had done, and especially if he ever became a believer. But the priest offers the baby boy to God because of the law that says the firstborn, the first one who opens the womb is mine, God is going to say in a while. So a priest lifts up the Son of God and says, okay, God, I'm going to dedicate this baby to you. Isn't that kind of neat? So I always think, like, if that priest later became a believer and somebody says, oh, yeah, you were the priest that did the presentation, he probably would have passed out. If he didn't become a believer, he would have probably never knew until he died, maybe. But anyway, so he gives the covenant, he subjects himself to the covenant. The first sign of the covenant is circumcision. It's a mark. When they find baby Moses, they know he's a Hebrew boy. Nobody else circumcises. Pagans didn't circumcise. They thought it was disgusting to do it. So when little baby Moses messed his diaper and somebody went to change him, they said, uh-oh, he's a Hebrew boy, but don't tell anybody. Good, she's laughing. That's it. But anyway, so go on from there. Wherever it was. At 9. Oh, no, we did 9, right? Yes, I'm sorry. 15. 15.
God further said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, do not call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her, and I will give you a son by her. Her also I will bless. She will give rise to nations, and rulers of peoples will issue from her. Abraham fell face down and laughed as he said to himself, can a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? And Sarah gave birth at 90. So Abraham said to God, if only Ishmael could live in your favor.
Okay, pause. So now God says Sarah's going to bear a son. Kings are going to come from her. She's going to be the mother of nations. Abraham falls down and he laughs. Okay? In the next chapter, we're going to see how Sarah laughs. And this is how Isaac gets his name. Isaac's name is Yitzhak, which means laughter. So because Abraham laughed and Sarah laughed, they named the boy Laughter, Yitzhak, Isaac. Sometimes the Hebrew names are cooler. I think Yitzhak's a cool name, and Abraham's a cool name. Now, I prefer to say Solomon over Shlomo. I think that's a horrible name. I'd hate to be named Shlomo. I'd rather be named Solomon. But anyway, boy, this is a tough crowd. But anyway, and look what he says after he laughs. Oh, if only Ishmael was still here. So God just told him, like he tells us stuff. And we say, oh, if only I had the other thing. Oh, if only I was going to, Cancun instead of to the mission over there. Oh, if only I was, if I only had this other job. Oh, if I only had $100,000 more dollars, then I could do this other thing. You see how he disobeys. Am I going to have a baby at 100? Is Sarah going to have a baby at 90? 90. I mean, it's pretty unusual to have a baby at 90. Not unusual for a man. A man never loses fertility. I mean, you're not as fertile, obviously, at 90 as you are at 20, but you're still fertile. Women, obviously, aren't fertile when they're 90. That's just the biological facts. But you notice what he says here. And Abraham said to God, says directly to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. I got Ishmael. We're not going to have another baby. Why don't you just bring Ishmael back here? Everything will be cool. And look how God answers at 19. Anybody? Yeah.
God said, no, Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son. You shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his descendants after him. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful, and he will multiply him exceedingly. He shall beget 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this set time next year.
Okay, let's pause there. God says, no. I blessed Ishmael. He's going to have 12 princes. Now remember, in a little while, there's going to be 12 tribes of Israel. Ishmael is going to have 12 princes. He's going to have all kinds of descendants. But my promise is through Isaac. My everlasting promise is through Isaac. In other words, Isaac is going to be the father of the Messiah, the ancestor of the Messiah, not Ishmael. Okay, Jesus is physically descended from Isaac And so is everybody in the world who's a Jew. That's the split-off point between Jews and Arabs. Arabs come from Ishmael, Jews come from Isaac. That's the first split point. So God says, no, we're not bringing Ishmael back. Don't worry about Ishmael. He's going to be fine. I blessed him. He's going to have all kinds of stuff. He's going to have all kinds of land. He's going to have all kinds of descendants. Don't worry about Ishmael. But he says, my covenant is with Isaac, and it's an everlasting covenant. Now, does he say the covenant's for 100 years, 1,000 years, 5,000? Everlasting covenant. In other words, if a covenant's everlasting, that means it's still in effect today. People say, oh, God's done with the Jews. Oh, the church takes the place of Israel. God's done with the Jews. Well, that's the everlasting covenant. And for your homework, you can read Jeremiah 31 from about 34 on, where God says, I made the sun and the moon, and they determine the days. If you can change that, if you can change how the sun and the moon work and how the days go, if you can change how the ocean moves, if you can measure the universe, if you can find the foundations of the earth, then I'll forget my covenant with Jacob. Which means never. Oh, sure, we can measure the earth now, and we can find out how far away a star is, but we can't change the way the sun and the moon move, But anyway, so it's going to be an everlasting covenant. But and that's coming through Isaac, and he's coming from Sarah. And he says, a year from now, you're going to have Isaac. So he'll be 100. Sarah will be 90, more or less. Abraham's already been on Social Security for 34 years. Gets his cost of living increase every year. And pays tax to the IRS. I know we're not supposed to curse anybody, but when it comes to taxes. Anyway, so we're going to go to 18, and we're going to see an amazing change of language here, which tells us something. If y'all don't mind, I'm going to just read it so that it can be on the video, because this is very powerful. It's going to happen. Not that you guys don't read awesome, but can't hear it on the video. But that's okay, because you should always read it, because like Hank Hanegraaff always says, you should get into the Word of God, and you should get the Word of God into you. And hearing somebody talk about it doesn't change it. You got to read it yourself. You got to get it. You got to digest it yourself. And it reminds me of another John Wimber story, for those of you that are Vineyard associated. John Wimber was on the road preaching all the time. He's the founder of the Vineyard churches, and he was always lecturing. And one day he's sitting in his hotel room, and he felt the Lord say to him, are you just going to talk about the Bible, or are you going to read it? Then he went, whoa. And then the next part was, are you going to talk about prayer, or are you actually going to pray? And he said after that encounter, he changed the way he did things. Because it's easy to say, well, I just want the highlights. I just want to read I just want the cliff notes. Or I just want the important point. Well, the ancient rabbis said that when you study Scripture, it's like peeling an onion. You got a layer, then there's another layer, then there's another layer. And I'm sure you've all experienced this. You read a passage, and then a week later you read it again, and you say, wow, I never realized that. I've done this Torah class, I don't know how many times, 20-some times probably. And the last time I did it, and we just finished up at the North Homestead group, I learned more from it that time than I had all the other times before. Because every time I was talking about stuff, people were reading stuff, the Lord was showing me, look at that. You didn't think about that before, did you? Well, he didn't say it that way, but you know what I mean. So look what happens in 18. Now, then the Lord, notice all capitals, the Lord, Yahweh, appeared to him by the terebinth trees of Mamre, as he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. This is Abraham we're talking about. So he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing by him. Okay, so the Lord appeared to him, and he sees 3 men. Amen. Yes. How intriguing is that? The Lord appears, 3 men. And when he saw them, doesn't say when he saw him, it says when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the ground and said, my Lord. Now there's 3 of them. Which one's he talking to? Is he just talking to one of them? He says, my Lord, if I have now found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. You are capitalized. Please let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. So we have singular word Lord, then we have 3 men, then we have plural, he saw them, he ran to meet them, then said, my Lord, singular again. Bring water and wash your feet and rest yourselves, plural again, under the tree. And I will bring a morsel of bread that you may refresh your hearts. Now, English, the word you in English, the plural is you. Okay? So you can't tell from the English. But in the Hebrew, this word is plural. I'll bring you a morsel of bread that you may refresh your hearts. After that, you may pass by, inasmuch as you have come to your servant. They said, do as you have said. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, quickly, make ready 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes. And Abraham ran to the herd, took a tender and good calf, and gave it to a young man, and he hastened to prepare it. So he took butter and milk and the calf, which he had prepared, and set it before them, as he stood under the tree, as they ate. Then they said to him, where is Sarah, your wife? So he said, here in the tent. And he said, so now we went back to the singular, and he said, I will certainly return to you according to the time of life, which means a year, and behold, Sarah your wife shall have a son. Now, at the end of the last chapter, God says to him, when I come back at this same time next year, you're going to have a son. Now he says, I will return to you. So we're back to the singular. And behold, Sarah your wife shall have a son. Sarah was listening in the tent door, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, well advanced in age, and Sarah had passed the age of childbearing. Therefore Sarah laughed within herself, saying, after I have grown old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord also being old? And the Lord, all capitals, Yahweh, said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? Saying, shall I surely bear a child since I am old? Is there anything too hard for the Lord? All capital letters. At the appointed time I will return to you, according to the time of life, and Sarah will have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he, singular, said, no, but you did laugh. Talk about rationalizing, It's like God saying, why did you do that? And you said, I never did that. And he says, yes, you did. When you die, you're going to see a videotape of it. You did it. I didn't laugh. She laughed within herself, so she didn't even laugh out loud. But, of course, he knew that she laughed. So another reason why Yitzhak gets his name. So, Lord appears. There's three men. And there's this interchange of they and I and he. So there's one, there's three, there's one, there's three. Pretty cool. I think that's pretty cool.
I know you're on a roll, so I hate to beat you up. You look at Genesis 1:1, and it's, from what I understand, it's a plural noun. It's
Elohim.
singular. Go to Genesis 1:26. Let us make man in our image.
Yes.
He wasn't speaking to angels.
Right.
So again, you have these inferences clearly
Yes.
about Trinitarian reality.
Yes.
Now you have again this interchange between plurality and singularity.
Yes.
My question is, for Orthodox Jews who study, how do they interpret those verses? What do they say?
Yeah. Well, this has come up many times in my life because I bring this up to them. They say what he's doing here is he's using what's called the royal we. Like when a king says, we declare this to be the case. They say, well, then why does he alternate between singular and plural? Well, it's the royal we. But you're right. Even Elohim, you can't explain that by royal he, because you say, Bereshit Elohim, in the beginning, gods created. Now, we know it's not plural gods, but in Hebrew the word is plural. Then the second verse, we know the Spirit hovers over the water. So there's God, plural, then there's a Spirit that's hovering over the water. What is that? There's a lot. There's Elohim's used a lot.
It's almost like just an explanation that mirrors how they try to explain away Isaiah 53.
Yes. 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 Yeah. I'm going to be talking about that Sunday morning, about Isaiah 53, at the Brethren Church, or Church of the Brethren, or whatever it is. So, but in this Genesis 18 passage, it's fascinating. And I always love when you fast forward to Jesus and he's confronting the leaders as he commonly does, and then he says, Abraham saw my day and he rejoiced, which they of course make fun of him and say, you're not even 50 years old, you knew Abraham? I mean, if you're living in the year, let's say it's 33 AD, and somebody says, oh yeah, Abraham saw me and he rejoiced, you go, what? You're not even 50 years old. How could you know Abraham? You'd have to be, 2,000 years old or 1,500 years old or whatever. So, the Greek there means Abraham leaps for joy when he sees Jesus' day. So we don't know exactly, how that all comes down, but somehow Abraham saw Jesus' day and he got so excited that he jumped. So there's this amazing passage with this 1 and 3 and 3 and 1 and 1 and 3 and 3 and 1. And then Abraham says, Jesus says, Abraham saw my day. Like I always say, Jesus could have said, well, as a matter of fact, I do know Abraham. And if you want, I can show him to you. I can have him come here if I want. He brings Moses and Elijah. He could have brought Abraham too. He could have just said, come here. Look, you guys, here's Abraham. Okay, Abraham, now go away. And they would have been like, whoa. That would have been awesome. I wish he would have done it. So isn't that cool? And then look what happens in 16. Then the men, so now we're back to plural, then the men rose from there and looked toward Sodom. Whoa. We got some business to do over there. They looked toward Sodom, and Abraham went with them to send them on their way. And the Lord, now we're back to Lord, one word, singular, said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing? You know, later on, he's going to say to the prophet Isaiah, I don't do anything without telling you first. We shouldn't be surprised by anything that happens because God tells us throughout this book what's going to happen. We don't always know the details. You know, you can have any number of end time scenarios, you know, and you can't say, oh, he's wrong and he's right and he's wrong and she's wrong, and because you don't know exactly all the details, but you know something is going to happen. You know, there's prophecy throughout this. It's written over 2,500 years by I don't know how many different authors, and it's all internally consistent. And people say, oh, wait a minute. What about the Sermon on the Mount? Wait a minute. Matthew calls it Sermon on the Mount. Luke calls it the Sermon on the Plain. Isn't that contradictory? I say, you ever been to Israel? And they say, no. I say, well, if you go to the place that's the Mount, there's a church there called the Church of the Beatitudes. And from there, and it's kind of a little, it's not real high, but it's a little bit high. And then from there, there's this incredibly gently sloping land that goes down to the sea. I mean, it's essentially flat, but it's a very, very shallow descent. So that if you're standing in the middle of that grassy area, you look around and you think, I'm on flat land. If you're at the top, you say, oh, wow, I'm up on a hill. So just because one calls it Sermon on the Mount, the other one calls it Sermon on the Plain, doesn't mean the whole Bible is screwed up. And you could probably find other examples. But so God says, I'm going to tell you what I did. But I think it says that there's like this ominous thing, like the three men get up and they look towards Sodom. Ooh. You know, later on, Jesus says, you know, he curses Capernaum and Bethsaida and Chorazin and says, if the people in Sodom and Gomorrah would have seen what these people saw, they would have converted. You guys saw all this stuff, you still don't convert? The place is cursed. So that's the kind of 3 and 1, 1 and 3, which is pretty cool. So Isaac's finally born. We're not going to spend time on the Sodom and Gomorrah thing. So we're going to go ahead to verse 21, and you're going to see, suffice it to say, that Isaac is born. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him. See, it emphasizes this is Sarah's son. It's not some other slave girl. It's not some woman Abraham picked up at the bar. This is Sarah's son. Sarah bore him. And they name him Isaac. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded. Now, since circumcision is a sign of the covenant, I should add, just for completeness, we don't have time to read it all, but Abraham circumcises himself. Ooh. And then he circumcises Ishmael as well. So Islam practices circumcision because Ishmael was circumcised. The Jews still practice circumcision because it's a law. You know, in fact, if you if you have any Jewish friends, I know we're in a wrong part of Cuyahoga County, but if you have any Jewish friends, you'll commonly hear somebody went to a bris, which is the circumcision. Okay, bris and brit are the same word. Brit means covenant. So if you go to a Messianic synagogue, if you want to come Saturday morning, we're each doing one of the readings. Then I get to do about a 1-minute teaching. Can you imagine me talking for 1 minute? Then a half hour later, they'll say, okay, that's enough. No, just kidding. But the New Testament reading is called the Brit Hadashah, which means the new covenant. Brit is the word for covenant. In Sephardic Hebrew, it's Brit. In Ashkenazi Hebrew, it's bris. Ends with same letter, but they pronounce it like an S instead of like a T. So it's commonly called a bris when you go to a circumcision. And it's basically called the bris milah, which is the covenant of circumcision. So serious business. If you don't circumcise your son, you're out of the community. You're not even allowed to go to Denny's to have breakfast. You're like out of the community. They have nothing to do with you because you reject the covenant. So Isaac is finally born. So now all that talk about descendants, so now he's got Isaac and he's got Ishmael, and God's telling him, I'll take care of Ishmael. You just worry about Isaac. So he's basically got 2 descendants instead of stars of the sky and grains of sand on the sea. So we're setting the stage, of course, for what's going to. All of it is a stage that goes on. I shouldn't say stage, but Shakespeare said the whole world is a stage. I used to always say the plan of salvation goes through the whole scriptures, like a line. And then one day, actually, when I was at Christ the King Church and I was just sitting there sort of praying, but not really praying, the Lord said to me, it's not a line, it's a panorama. I thought, wow, that's cool, because it's like, it's not a line. There's all kinds of stuff going on around everybody who's, going through it as we approach salvation. Some of the stuff is good. Some of the stuff is not so good. I'll make my own plan. I'll sleep with the slave girl. That's not the plan. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's not? Oh, no, it's not the plan. Oh, I think we should do this. No, that's not the plan. David, a man after my own heart. The Holy Spirit rushes on David and never departs. Well, but I want a lot of wives. I want a lot of mistresses. I want power. I want to kill this guy. That's not the plan, but all the mess is in there, along with the plan. So we're in the plan, but we're also in a mess. We did a lot of mission work in garbage dumps in Mexico City for many, many years. And when you think about it, our lives are kind of like a garbage dump compared to what, the angels and the saints and heaven. I mean, they're in this beautiful place and they look down and go, man, that place is disgusting. Jesus comes from the glory of heaven into live in a garbage dump. And this is, a beautiful room and it's got all this stuff here, but, we're all sinners and we all live in a garbage dump. We're all mucking around in the dirt. But yet we're part of the plan of salvation. So how cool is that? So that's the end of, what is this? 5.